Dakota Territory, Dead Crow's Hollow, December 1881. The Winchester 73 model. 1873 lever action's sharp crack split the December morning like breaking thunder, sending Clara Evangeline diving behind the overturned freight wagon as wood splinters exploded around her. Her breath came in sharp puffs of white vapor as she clutched the leather satchel containing fabric samples, measuring tools, and one ornate silver pocket watch that 3 men had already died trying to possess. Nowhere left to run, seamstress. Travers called from his position among the frost-laden pines, working the falling block of his Sharps rifle with professional calm. That timepiece belongs to the Western Line Railroad, and we aim to collect what's rightfully ours. Clara pressed herself against the wagon's splintered underside, feeling the December cold seep through her wool dress. Her fingers found the heavy watch through the leather, its weight familiar after 5 days of desperate flight across Dakota Territory's unforgiving landscape. Hidden within its ornate mechanism lay secrets that could topple powerful men from their thrones of corruption if she survived long enough to deliver them to honest hands. 20 yards up the treacherous ridge trail, her hired horse had bolted when the shooting started, leaving her stranded, with only determination and the slim hope that death might come quickly when Pike's men finally closed their trap. What had begun as a simple tailoring commission from the smooth-talking Otto Griggs in Dead Crow's Hollow had escalated into a deadly game where corporate greed measured human lives as acceptable losses in pursuit of profit. A shadow moved between the timber to her left. Chaska, Silver Star, materialized from terrain that had seemed empty moments before his moccasined feet silent on the frost-hardened earth. At 32, the dismissed Lakota scout moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator, his intelligent dark eyes cataloging threats while his weathered hands worked the lever of his Winchester with practiced efficiency. 3 men closing from the ridge, Travers holding high ground, he whispered, settling beside her against the wagon's meager protection. Professional spacing, they've hunted people before. Clara studied his weathered face, noting the jagged scar running from his left temple toward his jaw. Can we reach higher ground? Silver Star's glance toward the unstable slope above them carried grim finality. Loose snow and granite up there. One wrong step could bring down half the mountainside. He checked his remaining cartridges with economical movements. We make our stand here, or die running like rabbits. The stark assessment should have terrified her. Instead, Clara felt the same strange calm that had sustained her through 6 days of pursuit, a transformation from the refined woman who had crossed the Atlantic seeking honest work into someone who understood that survival demanded steel in the spine. Then we fight, she said, her voice carrying conviction that surprised them both. Silver Star nodded grimly and rose to return fire, his shot taking Travers's hat clean off and sending the gunman scrambling for better cover. Welcome to Dakota Territory, Miss Evangeline. Out here justice gets decided by who shoots straightest. 7 days earlier, morning mist had hung heavy over Dead Crow's Hollow when Clara stepped down from the westbound stage, her practical traveling dress and determined expression marking her as different from the usual run of women who ventured into Dakota Territory's harsh frontier. At 28, she possessed the steady hands and sharp eyes that had made her one of Paris's most sought-after seamstresses before scandal and financial ruin drove her across the Atlantic to this unforgiving land. The Western Line Railroad had hired her specifically to tailor uniforms for their expanding workforce, a commission that seemed straightforward when she signed the contract in Chicago's comfortable offices. What she hadn't anticipated was how this territory's vast emptiness would strip away civilized certainties, leaving only the brutal arithmetic of staying alive. She was securing modest lodgings at Murphy's boarding house when Otto Griggs first approached his expensive clothes and calculating smile marking him as someone who prospered while others struggled. The gambler moved with oiled confidence, though Clara's trained eye noted subtle strain around his pale blue eyes. "Miss Evangeline, I presume." Otto removed his silk hat with practiced courtesy. "Your reputation for exceptional needlework precedes you even to our humble frontier settlement." Clara straightened, immediately wary of flattery from strangers. "We haven't been properly introduced, sir." "Otto Griggs, entirely at your service. I represent certain business interests that might benefit from your particular skills." He produced a folded paper from his brocade vest. "I require a coat tailored with special modifications, hidden pockets for sensitive documents. Delicate work, requiring the finest hands and utmost discretion." The commission was unusual, but not unprecedented. Clara had sewn similar garments for Parisian clients who valued privacy in their affairs. When she quoted her standard price, Otto claimed insufficient cash, but offered alternative payment in the form of an ornate silver pocket watch. "French craftsmanship of the highest order," he assured her, pressing the timepiece into her palm. "Worth easily twice your asking price. Consider it an investment in what I hope will be a mutually prosperous relationship." Clara accepted reluctantly, more from professional courtesy than enthusiasm. The watch felt heavier than its size suggested, its elaborately engraved surface covered with symbols that seemed more significant than decorative. She tucked it away without close examination, focused instead on the technical challenge of creating invisible storage within fabric structure. What Clara couldn't know was that Otto Griggs walked a razor's edge between competing loyalties. Officially, he worked as courier for the Western Line Railroad, carrying bribes and sensitive intelligence between corrupt officials scattered throughout Dakota Territory. Secretly, he had been feeding carefully selected information to federal investigators who suspected the railroad of systematic treaty violations, land fraud, and murder on a scale that reached into Washington's highest corridors of power. The silver timepiece contained far more than decorative engravings. Hidden within its intricate mechanism lay a folded map marking illegal expansion routes, a coded list of names marked for elimination, and most damning of all, a telegram fragment bearing official federal seal. "Presidential authorization confirmed. Native removal complete by spring deadline. Territorial status dependent on compliance with expansion schedule." Among the coded assassination targets appeared the initials SS, belonging to Chaska Silver Star, whose intimate knowledge of Dakota Territory's trails and native customs had made him valuable to territorial authorities until his principles exceeded his usefulness to corrupt superiors. Silver Star had spent nearly a decade guiding cavalry patrols through the complex network of treaties, sacred sites, and seasonal territories that defined his people's relationship with the expanding American frontier. His dismissal came when Colonel Morrison ordered him to lead troops through sacred winter pastures, where his cousin's band traditionally sheltered horses during brutal winter months. "Find another path or wait for spring." Silver Star had told Morrison, his voice steady, despite knowing the consequences. "I won't guide soldiers over sacred ground where my ancestors' bones rest." Morrison's response was swift and predictable. Silver Star found himself dismissed with barely enough pay for winter supplies, his refusal noted in official reports as uncooperative behavior by hostile Indian elements, language that effectively marked him for future elimination. Rather than retreat to reservation boundaries, Silver Star began tracking the organized rustler ring that had been systematically stealing horses from Lakota bands and selling them to railroad construction crews. The rustlers operated with complete impunity, knowing complaints from Native Americans carried little weight with territorial authorities bought with Western Line gold. It was this dangerous work that brought him to the Ridge Trail when Clara's stage came under attack. Following tracks suggesting stolen horses sold to railroad crews, he instead discovered chaos, overturned wagons, scattered luggage, and a Parisian seamstress clutching a satchel while gunmen closed in for the kill. Their first meeting occurred under gunfire. Silver Star materialized from timber as Clara dove for cover, his presence announced by his Winchester's sharp report and Travers's sudden scramble for position. "Stay low and follow my lead," he said, without preamble, already moving toward better cover. "Those men aren't here for your luggage." Clara looked up to find a tall man with intelligent dark eyes and silver-ornamented braids, someone who moved through this deadly situation with controlled calm. His long coat and traditional leggings marked him as Lakota, but his weapons and tactics spoke of extensive military training. "Who are you?" she gasped, clutching her satchel as bullets chipped bark around them. "Someone who doesn't like seeing women murdered by railroad thugs. Can you ride hard without falling off?" "Yes, but..." "Then we ride now before they bring reinforcements." What neither realized was that their alliance was observed by men whose interest went beyond casual surveillance. Pinkerton agents had been tracking Otto Griggs for weeks, knowing he carried information exposing Western Line's illegal activities. When Otto disappeared after meeting, Clara found dead in an alley with his throat cut. Agents naturally assumed she had inherited his dangerous cargo. As Clara struggled to mount Silver Star's spare horse, her satchel spilled open, revealing fabric samples, measuring tools, and the ornate timepiece that would change both their lives. Silver Star's sharp intake told her he recognized something significant. "Where did you get that particular watch?" he demanded, even as shots cracked around them. "Payment for tailoring work from Otto Griggs. He's dead now. I saw them carry his body out this morning." Silver Star's expression hardened as pieces fell into place. Otto's murder, the coordinated attack on Clara's stage, the professional manner of their pursuers. This was no random frontier violence, but carefully orchestrated elimination of witnesses to railroad conspiracy. "Then we're both marked for death," he said grimly, spurring his mount toward the tree line. "That timepiece contains information powerful men will kill entire towns to suppress." As they galloped into forest with bullets snapping branches overhead, Clara realized her comfortable world of Parisian salons had vanished forever. She was now a fugitive carrying secrets that could destroy political careers and corporate empires if she could stay alive long enough to deliver them to someone who valued justice more than profit. The trail Silver Star chose wound through country designed to test both horse and rider. Ancient pines pressed close from both sides, their branches heavy with snow that fell in sudden cascades when wind shifted direction. Beneath the deceptive white surface lay treacherous ice patches that could cripple mounts or break riders' bones. Clara pulled her wool cloak tighter, grateful for Silver Star's steady pace and ability to find safest footing even in questionable terrain. He moved with economy of effort that spoke of decades of harsh condition experience, never wasting energy, but remaining constantly alert to environmental changes and pursuit signs. Storms building serious power, he observed, reading atmospheric signs invisible to Clara's urban-trained senses. "We need proper shelter within 2 hours or weather will finish what Pike's hired guns started." How far to somewhere safe? "Nowhere's truly safe with federal marshals and Pinkertons hunting us," Silver Star replied. "But there's a cabin ahead, maybe 3 miles. Doctor lives there when he's not traveling his circuit." As they crested a small ridge, Clara glimpsed their destination, smoke rising from a stone chimney in a thin gray line, warm light glowing behind oiled paper windows. The sight filled her with relief she hadn't realized she desperately needed. Dr. Hal Garner emerged as they approached a grizzled man of perhaps 50, whose frostbitten fingers and weathered features spoke of decades answering medical calls regardless of conditions. His worn leather bag sat ready beside the door, testament to a life spent in constant emergency readiness. "Storm's going to be a real screamer," Doc Garner said by way of greeting, noting their obvious distress. "You folks look like you've been riding through hell itself. Come inside before you freeze on my doorstep." The cabin's interior radiated blessed warmth and functional comfort. Medical supplies lined wooden shelves alongside books whose pages showed frequent consultation. A cast-iron pot of venison stew simmered over the fire, filling the space with aromas that reminded Clara how little she'd eaten since their flight began. Disaster struck while she removed her cloak. Clara's satchel, heavy with supplies, and the silver timepiece slipped from numbed fingers and struck the plank floor hard enough to spring its brass clasps. Contents scattered across worn boards, fabric samples, measuring tools, sketching charcoal, and Otto's ornate pocket watch. Silver Star, kneeling to help gather scattered items, stopped abruptly when he saw the timepiece. Its surface bore engravings he recognized immediately, the distinctive crest of Ambrose Litchfield, railroad magnate, whose western line was pushing inexorably westward across Dakota territory. Below the crest, smaller script read, "Log Chain Spur Survey Approved." "This is what they're killing for," he said quietly, his voice carrying steel that made both Clara and Doc Garner look up sharply. Clara explained Otto's commission and payment words, tumbling as she recognized gravity in Silver Star's expression. When she finished, he was examining the timepiece with intensity of a man reading his death warrant. "This spur cuts straight through sacred winter pasture where my cousin's band shelters horses," he said grimly. "They start construction, people die. My people, your people, makes no difference to men like Litchfield." Doc Garner peered over Silver Star's shoulder with professional curiosity. "Looks like there's more inside, some kind of hinge mechanism." With careful pressure, Silver Star opened the timepiece's inner case. Folded to fit available space lay multiple documents, a detailed map covered with symbols and abbreviations, a coded list of names, and most shocking of all, a telegram fragment bearing official federal seal. "Survey points and payoff locations," Silver Star said, studying the map. "This column lists names marked for elimination. And this—" He held up the telegram fragment, face grim. "Government authorization for treaty violations and forced removal." Clara leaned closer, seamstress-trained eyes picking out details the men missed. "There, SS. Those are your initials. And here, OG, Otto Griggs. They're systematically murdering anyone threatening expansion." Before Silver Star could respond, approaching horses cut through the cabin's warmth like blade strokes. Doc Garner moved quickly to his window, peering through oiled paper at shapes materializing through falling snow. "Riders coming fast," he said tersely. 8, maybe 10. They're not here for medical treatment." Silver Star was already moving rifle in hand as he kicked out the cabin's rear shutter. "We leave now, through there." "What about Doc?" Clara protested, gathering scattered belongings with trembling hands. "Doc's survived worse than railroad thugs," Silver Star replied, though his glance toward the older man carried respect and concern. "Haven't you, Doc?" Dr. Garner was upending his medicine chest to create a barricade against the front door. "Survived cholera epidemics, 3 Indian wars, and 4 wives who tried to reform me. A handful of corporate killers won't finish me." He grinned fiercely. "Get moving. I'll buy you time and patch up whatever wounds this foolishness produces." The first gunshot cracked like breaking timber as Clara squeezed through the narrow opening Silver Star created. She landed hard on frozen ground dress, catching on ice-crusted thorns as Silver Star dropped beside her. Behind them, additional shots echoed from inside the cabin, followed by Doc Garner's voice, raised in colorful profanity. "Stay low, move when I move," Silver Star whispered, leading her through brush designed to catch and tear clothing. "Stop when I stop. These men are professionals." They'd covered perhaps 60 yards when a bullet chipped bark from a tree near Clara's head, the sound sharp and final in crystalline air. She pressed against frozen earth, instinctively feeling Silver Star's weight cover her as boots pounded somewhere above on the ridge. "Breathe slow and steady," he murmured, face inches from hers in gathering dusk. "They're shooting at movement now, not clear targets." In intimacy forced by immediate danger, Clara found herself studying weathered planes of his face, noting the scar and the way his dark eyes never stopped cataloging threats and opportunities. His competence provided anchor in chaos threatening to overwhelm rational thought. "Why are you risking your life to help me?" she whispered. Because Otto Griggs was trying to expose this conspiracy when they butchered him. Because that timepiece represents justice for people who've died protecting their land. His jaw tightened. And because no woman should face Pike's killers alone. Pursuit sounds grew fainter as they worked toward the frozen Little Bad Fork River, but Silver Star showed no relaxation. If anything, his tension increased approaching the water. "Ice broke up early this year," he said, testing surface with a long willow branch. "Spring melt started ahead of schedule. What looks solid might not hold our weight." Clara stared at the deceptively smooth surface stretching toward the far bank. In dim light, she could see dark seams where ice had begun separating, creating networks of potential disaster that would plunge them into water cold enough to kill within minutes. "Can we go around?" "Not with them behind us." Silver Star found a crossing point where ice appeared thickest, though stress marks suggested questionable integrity. "Follow exactly where I step. If ice starts failing, don't fight the current. Let it carry you downstream where it's shallow." They began crossing with agonizing slowness, testing each step before committing full weight to questionable surface. Clara's heart hammered as she followed Silver Star's footsteps, acutely aware that single mistake would dump them into water-stealing consciousness within seconds. Halfway across, Travers appeared on the bank. They'd left rifle tracking their movement with professional precision. Clara saw muzzle flash before hearing the shot, felt ice beneath feet spider with new fractures as the bullet struck behind her. Silver Star rolled instantly, pulling her against his chest, as an ice section tilted and broke away from main surface. The plunge into Little Bad Fork hit Clara like a physical blow, driving breath from lungs and sending cold needles through every nerve. Current, stronger than it appeared from above, immediately began pulling them downstream toward rapids that would dash them against rocks. Silver Star's arm locked around her waist as he kicked desperately toward bank, fighting both current and weight of sodden winter clothing. Clara tried to help, but found limbs growing sluggish as hypothermia began its deadly work. Consciousness started slipping away, like warmth fleeing her body. Then, Silver Star's boots found purchase on gravel, and he was dragging her onto solid ground, both streaming water that began freezing almost immediately in bitter air. Clara's dress clung like ice armor, and she felt blood seeping where fabric had torn over a bullet graze on her shoulder. "Can't stop here," Silver Star said through chattering teeth, already scanning for shelter. "Cold will kill us faster than bullets if we don't get warm soon." 20 yards upstream, hidden behind winter bare willows, stood what appeared to be an abandoned storage shed. The structure looked questionable, door hanging on leather hinges, but it would block the killing wind already stealing what little body heat they retained. Inside, they found survival materials, a small metal drum, serving as stove, enough broken fence posts for fuel, dry hay for insulation, and walls providing protection from elements, caring nothing for human ambitions. Silver Star had fire started within minutes, hands moving with practiced efficiency, despite violent shaking from cold and shock. "Clothes," he said, simply turning his back as he stripped off soaked shirt. "Everything wet comes off, or we die of exposure. Modesty's a luxury we can't afford." Clara hesitated only momentarily before recognizing brutal logic of their situation. Death waited in freezing fabric, clinging to skin. She peeled away worst of her sodden clothing, grateful for fire's growing warmth and buffalo hide cloak Silver Star wrapped around them both. But her wounded shoulder needed attention. As Silver Star gently cleaned the bullet graze with heated water, Clara found herself studying his concentrated expression, the careful way his fingers worked around torn flesh. "This will hurt," he warned, reaching for clean cloth to bind the wound. Clara nodded, biting her lip as he wrapped her shoulder with professional competence. The intimacy of their situation, half naked, pressed together for shared body heat, dependent on each other for survival, created bonds transcending social barriers, normally separating Lakota man from white woman in Dakota territory. "What about you?" Silver Star asked quietly as he secured the bandage. What drove a skilled seamstress from Paris to Dakota territory? Clara was quiet for a long moment, feeling warmth slowly return, and with it courage to share truth she'd hidden since arriving in America. "A scandal that destroyed my reputation," she said finally, voice carrying old pain. "I became involved with Madame Dubois, wife of a prominent minister. When her husband discovered our relationship, he threatened to destroy me unless I disappeared from Paris entirely." She paused. "I thought distance would help me forget her. Instead, it just made everything else seem meaningless." Silver Star's expression showed no judgment, only understanding. Love makes outlaws of us all one way or another. As warmth slowly returned and immediate crisis passed, Clara became aware of other sensations, steady rhythm of Silver Star's breathing. Way her forehead naturally found hollow of his collarbone, strength in arms, holding the cloak around them both. These weren't simply survival necessities anymore, but something deeper. Neither was prepared to acknowledge given dangers still surrounding them. "Clara," Silver Star said quietly, and hearing her name in his voice sent warmth through her, having nothing to do with fire. She looked up to meet his gaze, seeing recognition there, and something deeper that made her breath catch. For a moment, world narrowed to just them, survivors, sharing heat and hope in refuge that might not exist tomorrow. Then wind howled through gaps in their shelter's walls, carrying distant sound of voices and hoofbeats, reminding them Pike's men were still hunting, and their enemies had resources, making capture only matter of time. Dawn brought no relief from pursuit that had driven them into Little Bad Fork's freezing waters. If anything, their situation had grown more desperate as word of their escape spread through networks of corrupt officials and hired guns serving Western Line interests. Clara woke to find Silver Star already alert, studying frost patterns on their shelter's single window, with intensity of someone reading tactical intelligence. His clothes had dried overnight, but dark stains on his shirt reminded her how close they'd come to death in icy river. "They know we survived," he said without preamble. "Travers is a professional tracker. He'll have found where we came out of water and followed our trail to within few hundred yards of here." Clara pulled buffalo cloak tighter, acutely aware her dress remained damp despite night's fire. "What are our options?" "Keep moving fast, stay ahead long enough to find allies, hope we can get this information to someone valuing justice more than railroad gold." Silver Star gestured toward her satchel, where the silver timepiece lay wrapped in oiled cloth. "That watch is only thing keeping us breathing right now." The route toward Dead Crow's Hollow wound through country offering little concealment but several ambush opportunities. Silver Star chose a path following river bottoms, where possible using stands of bare cottonwoods to screen movement from observers on higher ground. They'd covered perhaps 2 miles when Silver Star suddenly dropped into crouch, motioning Clara to follow. Through trees ahead, she could see buildings of Dead Crow's Hollow, collection of false-fronted structures, managing to look both permanent and temporary. More importantly, she could see men moving between buildings with purposeful stride of organized searchers. Even at distance, glint of metal suggested they were armed and coordinated. Pike's men. Silver Star confirmed, studying scene through narrowed eyes. "They're watching every approach, waiting for us to make mistake." "Then how do we get this information to someone who can act on it?" Silver Star remained quiet for several minutes, working through possibilities with methodical patience of someone accustomed to life-or-death decisions. When he spoke, Voice carried flat certainty of plan that might work if they were very careful and very lucky. I know someone who might help. Jonas Miller owns small farm about mile from town. He lost his oldest boy in one of Pike's convenient accidents last year, mine collapse that killed 3 men asking questions about safety violations. They made approach carefully using terrain features and natural cover to stay hidden from Pike's surveillance network. As they drew closer to Miller's property, Clara could see why Silver Star trusted the man. The farm showed signs of hard work, honest poverty, and stubborn independence. Jonas Miller emerged from his barn as they approached a man of perhaps 40, whose careful movements spoke of someone who'd learned to be wary of unexpected visitors. His work-calloused hand rested near the shotgun, leaning against barn door, but expression showed recognition rather than hostility seeing Silver Star. Heard Pike's men were hunting someone with considerable determination, Jonas said by way of greeting voice, carrying careful tones of a man who'd learned to weigh every word. Figured it might be you, given how things ended between you and territorial authorities. We need help, Jonas. We've got information that could bring down Pike and his entire operation. Jonas's expression grew thoughtful as Clara explained their situation and showed him the timepiece's contents. His weathered features darkened with recognition as he studied the coded names on the assassination list, people from his community who'd died under supposedly accidental circumstances. Johnson's mine collapse wasn't any accident, he said grimly, voice carrying weight of personal experience. Man had been asking questions about railroad land grants for months before they killed him, and Henderson's hunting mishap, everyone knew he'd found survey stakes where they shouldn't be. But as Jonas studied the documents, Clara noticed something troubling in his expression, a flicker of fear that went beyond normal concern. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly, but not before she caught something that made her uneasy. "Will you help us get this information to someone who can take action?" Clara asked, studying his face. "I'll do what I can," Jonas replied after careful consideration. But Pike's got most official channels sewn up with bribes and threats. Judges, sheriffs, even territorial governor, they're all taking railroad money. He paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal conflict. But there might be another way. What Jonas proposed was both simple and dangerous, a public meeting where information could be presented directly to families affected by Pike's crimes. If enough people heard truth and saw documented evidence, public outrage might force official action, even from corrupt authorities. "There's Old Methodist Church about 2 miles east of town," Jonas explained, voice growing more confident. "Been abandoned since preacher died last spring, but it's got good sight lines and only one approach road. Pike's half-sister, Lena, runs schoolhouse. She might help organize something if she believed evidence was genuine." Clara felt pulse quicken. "Pike has a sister who might help us." "Half-sister, different mothers. Lena came out to teach school 3 years ago, but she's witnessed enough of Harlan's methods to have serious doubts." Jonas's expression darkened. "She lost one of her students' fathers to convenient accident just last month." This information added new dimension to their tactical situation. Lena Pike potentially represented ally with inside knowledge of her brother's operations, someone who might have access to additional information, helping them understand full conspiracy scope. As they discussed details, Clara became aware of riders approaching through timber. Jonas heard them too, expression immediately tightening as he recognized organized sound of hunting party closing on quarry. "Barn," he said tersely, gesturing toward structure behind them. "Root cellar underneath with tunnel coming out in woods about 100 yards north. Move now before they get close enough to spot you." Clara and Silver Star moved quickly, but their luck had run out. As they reached barn door, Travers emerged from tree line with rifle ready, flanked by 3 other gunmen, whose professional bearing marked them as Pinkerton agents. "That's far enough," Travers called weapon trained on Silver Star's chest. "Drop your guns and step away from the woman. We just want to discuss business like civilized men." "Talking's done," Silver Star replied, diving sideways as his Winchester came up. "Run, Clara, the tunnel." What followed was brief but vicious firefight, leaving one Pinkerton dead and Travers wounded, but also costing them their escape chance through Jonas's tunnel. Clara found herself pinned behind water trough while bullets chipped chunks from its wooden sides. The standoff might have continued until reinforcements arrived, but fate intervened in most unexpected way. The sound that made every man freeze was one Silver Star recognized immediately: howl of wolves close and getting closer, drawn by scent of blood and promise of easy prey. Wolf pack. Silver Star called to Travers, temporarily setting aside deadly conflict in favor of mutual survival. Large one, and they're hunting. Travers's response revealed professional respect for natural dangers transcending human conflicts. How many? At least 8, maybe 12. Winter-starved and desperate enough to attack anything that moves. Wolfpack's appearance changed entire standoff dynamic. Suddenly, Clara and Silver Star were no longer primary concern for Pike's men, who found themselves facing predators that couldn't be bribed or intimidated. First attack came without warning, gray shadow materializing among Pinkerton positions with silence of smoke and speed of lightning. A man screamed, sound cut short by wet finality of fangs finding throat. Rifle fire erupted as remaining agents tried defending against enemies moving like spirits through terrain they thought they controlled. In chaos that followed, Clara and Silver Star slipped away from defensive positions, using deadly distraction to put crucial distance between themselves and battle they couldn't win. Behind them, sounds of human versus predator conflict continued. Snarls, gunshots, screams that might have come from either species. They'd covered perhaps mile when Silver Star suddenly stopped, hand raised for silence. Through trees ahead, Clara could see glow of firelight and hear voices sounding organized rather than panicked. Someone else was abroad in afternoon light, and determining whether they represented help or additional danger required careful reconnaissance. Camp, they discovered, belonged to Dr. Hal Garner, who'd apparently survived his encounter with Pike's men and established temporary medical station. Sight of his familiar face brought tears of relief to Clara's eyes. "Doc," Silver Star called softly from edge of firelight. "It's us." Garner looked up from cleaning rifle that hadn't been part of his equipment during previous encounter, face breaking into genuine grin. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought Pike's boys had finished you both. Come on in, got coffee that's almost drinkable and news you need to hear." As they emerged into firelight, Clara could see Doc Garner bore signs of recent violence: bruised face, torn clothing, careful movements of someone nursing injuries he hadn't yet had time to properly treat. But his spirit seemed undaunted. "What happened after we left your cabin?" Clara asked, accepting coffee that tasted like salvation. "Pike's boys got creative with their questioning techniques," Doc replied, rolling up sleeve to reveal purple bruises. "Wanted to know where you'd gone, what you'd seen, whether I'd help decode that timepiece." "What did you tell them?" Doc Garner's grin turned predatory. "Told them I was doctor, not detective, and if they wanted medical advice, I'd be happy to explain what those bruises would look like in few days. Turns out they didn't appreciate my bedside manner." The doctor's resilience impressed Clara, but she could see their situation remained desperate despite this brief respite. Pike's surviving men would regroup once they dealt with Wolfpack, and professional trackers would be able to follow their trail even in most difficult conditions. "Doc, Silver Star," said, voicing question dominating Clara's thoughts. "Who in this territory has authority and backbone to act on evidence of railroad corruption reaching Washington?" Dr. Garner considered question while rebandaging injured arm. "There's territorial inspector coming next week. Benjamin Holbrook sent from Washington to investigate complaints about railroad land grants. If you could get evidence to him, Pike will have him bought or buried before he sees anything important, Silver Star replied grimly. These people don't leave things to chance. Then what do you suggest? Clara had been thinking about this problem throughout their flight, weighing options against available resources and probable outcomes. Solution she proposed was audacious in simplicity and terrifying in implications. We make it public, she said. Not through official channels that can be controlled, but directly to people who've been harmed by these crimes. We call meeting present evidence, let public outrage force official action. Doc Garner and Silver Star stared at her, as if she'd proposed flying to moon. In territory where railroad money influenced every newspaper, controlled most officials, and commanded loyalty of armed men willing to kill for pay, public exposure seemed impossibly naive. Who would come to such meeting? Doc asked. And how would we protect them from retaliation? Families of dead men don't fear retaliation way living men do, Clara replied. And there are more of them than there are Pike's hired guns. Sometimes ordinary people can stand against extraordinary corruption if they're given truth and courage to act on it. It was desperate gamble based on hope that grief and anger could overcome fear and intimidation when people were finally shown evidence of what they'd long suspected. But as they discussed idea, it began taking shape as their only realistic option for achieving something more than temporary survival. Plan they developed relied on Doc Garner's knowledge of local families and Silver Star's understanding of tactical positioning. They would use abandoned Methodist church as meeting place with defensive positions that could be held by determined civilians against professional attackers. More importantly, they would time gathering to coincide with Inspector Holbrook's arrival, forcing him to witness events that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. It might work, Doc admitted as they finalized details, but it will definitely get us all killed if it fails. We're already marked for death, Silver Star pointed out. At least this way we die trying to accomplish something worthwhile instead of just running until exhaustion makes us easy targets. The abandoned Methodist church sat in grove of leafless cottonwoods, providing natural concealment while offering clear fields of fire in all directions. Silver Star studied building through pre-dawn darkness, noting details invisible to less experienced eyes. Way shadows fell around structure condition of ground that would reveal approaching footsteps, positions, offering tactical advantage to defenders. Good, defensible position, he observed quietly, indicating smoke barely visible against gray sky. Lena's keeping small fire, staying warm, but trying not to announce presence. Clara followed his gaze, seeing nothing but darkness until her eyes adjusted to subtle signs he'd learned to read. How do we approach without getting shot by nervous schoolteacher, carefully with hands visible? They covered final 100 yards in crouch, using cottonwoods for concealment, while remaining alert for signs Pike's men had discovered Lena's hiding place. Silence was profound, broken only by whisper of wind through bare branches and distant cry of hunting owl. Lena Pike's voice came from inside church, when they were still 20 feet from door, carrying flat authority of woman prepared to defend herself. That's close enough. State your business clearly. Clara Evangeline, Clara called back. From schoolhouse 2 days ago. I have Silver Star with me and we have information about your brother's activities. Prove it. Clara thought quickly, searching for information that would convince Lena of their identity without providing useful intelligence to any enemies who might be listening. You keep Derringer in your primer book. You told me your brother's accident reports cover up murders, including student's father who asked safety questions. Church door opened cautiously, revealing Lena Pike with left arm in makeshift sling and right hand holding small Derringer Clara had mentioned. Her face bore pallor of recent blood loss, but eyes remained sharp and alert. Inside quickly, she said, stepping back to allow entry. We don't have much time before Harlan's men return for another search. Church's interior had been stripped of everything valuable when congregation disbanded, leaving only bare walls and few broken pews providing fuel for small fire Lena maintained in what had once been pulpit area. Despite building's deteriorated condition, it offered solid shelter and defensive positions difficult for attackers to approach unseen. Pike's men searched this place twice yesterday, Lena said, as they settled around fire's warmth. They'll be back probably before noon. We need to finish business and be gone before then. Clara produced silver timepiece, noting how Lena's expression darkened as she recognized implications of its ornate engravings. When hidden compartments were opened to reveal folded map-coded assassination list and government telegram fragment, schoolteacher's face went white with understanding. "Dear God," she whispered, studying coded names with growing horror. "Half these people are already dead. Other half will be if we don't find way to stop this," Silver Star said bluntly. "Your brother's part of something bigger than mine accidents and convenient disappearances. They're planning to restructure entire territory to serve railroad interests." Lena's knowledge of her brother's operations proved invaluable in decoding timepiece contents. She could match coded initials to actual names, identify locations marked on map, and provide crucial context for systematic elimination of obstacles to railroad expansion. What emerged was picture of conspiracy reaching from Dead Crow's Hollow to corporate boardrooms in New York and government offices in Washington. "There is one possibility," Lena said slowly, as if idea were forming as she spoke. "Benjamin Holbrook, Territorial Inspector, is supposed to arrive tomorrow. If we could present this information in public forum where he'd be forced to witness it, Pike will have him bought or intimidated before he sees anything that matters," Silver Star replied. "These people have too much at stake to leave anything to chance." "Not if presentation happens in front of enough witnesses," Clara interjected, plan taking shape as she spoke. "What if we called public meeting, invited all families who've lost someone to Pike's operations, made revelations so public that even corrupt officials couldn't ignore them?" It was a desperate gamble, but as they discussed idea, it began taking shape as their only realistic option for achieving something more than temporary survival. Morning of what would become known throughout Dakota Territory as Dead Crow's Hollow revelation dawned clear and bitterly cold, with crystalline air, making distant objects seem preternaturally sharp and close. Clara stood at Church's single unbroken window, watching trail leading from town, knowing that within hours it would either carry allies who could help expose conspiracy or enemies who would silence them forever. Silver Star had spent pre-dawn hours establishing defensive positions around Church, using military experience to create overlapping fields of fire, making any assault costly for attackers. But they all understood that if Pike arrived with sufficient force, their preparations would amount to little more than choosing manner of their deaths. Lena Pike sat at makeshift altar, writing testimony in careful schoolteacher's hand, despite pain from wounded arm. Her penmanship remained precise, even under desperate circumstances, testament to years of drilling proper form into frontier children. "Mrs. Henderson will come," she said, pausing in writing. "Her husband died in mind collapse last month, and she knows it wasn't accidental. Widow Miller, too, she's suspected for weeks that her husband's hunting accident was deliberately arranged. How many others do you think we can count on? Perhaps dozen families, if they can find courage to risk Harlan's retaliation. More if word spreads and people begin believing we might actually succeed." First arrivals appeared shortly after noon. Woman in widow's black, leading 2 children who clung to her worn skirts, followed by older man whose gnarled hands spoke of decades working claims that made other men rich. They approached Church cautiously, clearly aware that attending this gathering marked them as enemies of powerful interests. Mrs. Henderson proved to be woman of perhaps 40, face bearing weathered lines of frontier hardship, but eyes burning with anger that months of grief had only intensified. She listened to Clara's presentation of evidence with growing fury, studying map and assassination list with intensity of woman seeking confirmation of suspicions, tormenting her sleep. "Thomas knew they were planning something," she said when Clara finished. "That's why they killed him. He found survey stakes on our claim stakes that weren't supposed to be there according to Railroad's public filings." More families arrived throughout afternoon, each bringing testimony, adding another piece to puzzle of systematic corruption and murder plaguing Dakota Territory for months. What emerged was pattern of crimes dwarfing even Clara's growing understanding of conspiracy's scope. Western Line Railroad hadn't simply been clearing obstacles from expansion route. They'd been engineering complete transformation of territory's political and economic structure. Treaties would be broken, communities destroyed, hundreds would die, all to serve profit margins of Eastern investors who would never see human cost of their dividends. But as afternoon wore on and more people gathered in abandoned church, Clara became increasingly aware their enemies were not idle. Among the families, she noticed Jonas Miller sitting slightly apart, occasionally glancing toward windows with nervous energy that didn't match grief-stricken demeanor of other attendees. When their eyes met, he looked away quickly, but not before Clara caught something unsettling in his expression. Answer came with arrival of Inspector Benjamin Holbrook, whose official coach appeared on trail from town just as sun began descent toward western horizon. Holbrook proved to be thin, nervous man, whose eastern clothing and pale complexion marked him as someone thoroughly out of place in Dakota Territory's harsh environment, but his credentials were impressive, and his presence provided official witness Clara hoped would make it impossible for Pike to simply eliminate everyone who'd heard testimony. "These are extremely serious allegations," Holbrook said, after examining timepiece contents with obvious amazement. "If substantiated, they would justify complete federal investigation of Western Line's operations throughout this territory." "Then you'll take action, Mrs. Henderson demanded, voice carrying pain of woman who'd buried husband without ever learning why he had to die. "I'll file comprehensive report recommending immediate federal intervention. But you must understand accusations of this magnitude require substantial verification before any official action can be taken." Holbrook's bureaucratic caution was interrupted by sound of approaching horses, many of them moving at pace, suggesting hostile intent rather than casual travel. Through church windows, Clara could see riders cresting surrounding hills from multiple directions, their numbers suggesting Pike had assembled every available man for this final confrontation. "They're here," Silver Star said, simply, checking rifle and counting cartridges remaining in belt. "At least 20 men, probably more. This is going to be their main effort." Families who'd come to hear truth suddenly found themselves trapped in building about to become battlefield. Children began crying as mothers pulled them away from windows that might soon be shattered by gunfire. Men who'd come seeking justice found themselves reaching for weapons they weren't certain they could use effectively against professional killers. But instead of panic, Clara saw something unexpected: grim determination. These were people who'd lost loved ones to conspiracy they were trying to expose, and presence of overwhelming force only confirmed their suspicions had been correct all along. Rather than fleeing in terror, they began preparing to defend truth they'd finally been allowed to hear. "We hold them here," Silver Star announced, voice carrying natural authority of someone accustomed to combat leadership. "Keep them busy until Inspector can get away with our evidence and summon federal assistance." "I'm not leaving," Holbrook said, surprising everyone with unexpected display of backbone. "If these people are willing to die for truth, least I can do is bear witness to their courage." First shots came without warning, rifle fire from surrounding hills, shattering windows and sending splinters flying from churches' wooden walls. Clara pressed herself against floor, feeling silver timepiece digging into ribs where she'd secured it beneath dress for protection. Silver Star's return fire was measured and precise, each shot carefully aimed to make limited ammunition count for maximum effect. Around church, other defenders added their voices to response: farmers with hunting rifles, widows with their dead husbands' pistols, even children old enough to reload weapons for adults fighting to protect them. Battle that followed would be remembered in Dakota Territory's history as moment when ordinary people finally stood up to corporate power and refused to be intimidated by hired guns and corrupt officials. But for those fighting, engagement was simply desperate struggle to survive long enough to ensure truth they'd uncovered would not die with them. Pike's men had superior numbers and professional training, but they were attacking defensive position held by people who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Every man and woman in that church had been personally harmed by conspiracy they were trying to expose, and their fury gave them courage, surprising even Silver Star with its intensity. Assault continued for nearly an hour, with Pike's forces probing for weaknesses, while defenders held positions through sheer determination and righteous anger. But Clara could see their situation becoming increasingly untenable with each passing minute. Ammunition was running dangerously low. Several defenders had been wounded by flying glass and splinters, and Pike's men were methodically closing circle around church. Then, disaster struck in, way none had anticipated. Stray bullet ignited old papers in church's rear corner, and flames began spreading rapidly through dry wood of abandoned building. Smoke filled interior, making accurate shooting impossible and threatening to drive defenders into open, where Pike's men could cut them down with ease. Fire, someone screamed, and suddenly tactical situation became exponentially more desperate. They could stay and burn or evacuate, and face overwhelming firepower in open ground around church. In growing chaos created by spreading flames and choking smoke, Clara noticed Jonas Miller moving toward rear exit with suspicious purpose. As fire spread and smoke thickened, he called out, "This way, I know safe path through the back." But Silver Star caught Clara's arm expression grim with sudden understanding. "Don't trust him. Something's been wrong about his behavior all day." Clara's suspicions crystallized into terrible clarity. He's been watching windows instead of listening to testimony. He knew this attack was coming. Before Miller could lead families into what might be traps, Silver Star confronted him directly. "You're working for Pike, aren't you, Jonas?" Miller's face crumpled as he found himself surrounded by people he'd betrayed. They threatened to kill my wife and children if I didn't help," he said, desperately, voice breaking. "I never wanted anyone hurt, but they said they'd burn my farm with my family inside if I didn't cooperate." His confession was cut short by sharp crack of rifle shot from outside burning church. Miller spun and collapsed, look of surprise on his face as blood spread across his shirt. Through smoke and flames, Clara caught glimpse of Pike himself standing in church doorway with smoking rifle. "No loose ends," Pike snarled with cold satisfaction, working bolt to chamber another round. "That includes every last one of you." But Pike's moment of triumph was suddenly interrupted by something none had expected. New group of riders appeared on horizon, moving at speed toward burning church and firing as they advanced. At first, Clara thought these were reinforcements for Pike, but then she recognized lead rider and felt her heart nearly stop. Otto Griggs was alive, leading what appeared to be a posse of deputy U.S. Marshals and sworn locals in coordinated assault on Pike's positions. The gambler she'd believed dead was very much alive, and apparently working for same federal authorities who'd sent Inspector Holbrook to investigate railroad corruption. But situation became even more chaotic as wolves drawn by gunfire and scent of blood began emerging from surrounding forest. Winter-starved pack moved with deadly coordination, attacking both sides indiscriminately, as smoke from burning church created scene of absolute chaos. "Otto's a federal agent," Silver Star said with sudden understanding. "Has been all along. His death was staged to make Pike think threat was eliminated. This revelation explained much that had puzzled Clara Otto's nervousness during their transaction, his knowledge of which officials to avoid, and most importantly, why he'd entrusted such dangerous evidence to seamstress he'd just met. He'd been placing timepiece where his superiors could retrieve it if his cover was blown. In chaos of burning church federal assault and wolf attacks, Clara found herself pressed against Silver Star as they fought their way through overturned pews and fallen timber toward safety. Smoke stung their eyes, and flames licked at her skirts, but she felt his arm around her waist steadying her as they navigated through hellish obstacle course. As they reached safety outside burning building, Silver Star pulled her close, and for one perfect moment amid all chaos surrounding them, their lips met in desperate kiss that tasted of smoke and hope and precious promise of survival against impossible odds. "Clara," he whispered against her ear voice, barely audible above sounds of battle, "I need you to know that I—" But his words were cut short, as Pike himself burst from flames, knife gleaming in his hand and murder in his eyes. What followed was vicious hand-to-hand combat, as Silver Star grappled with man who'd orchestrated so much death and suffering. Pike was desperate and strong, but Silver Star had youth and training on his side. When Pike's knife thrust missed by inches, Silver Star's counterstrike found its mark. Pike collapsed, clutching his chest, his empire of fear and corruption finally ending with his last breath. What followed was less battle than complete rout, as Pike's surviving hired guns found themselves caught between federal marshals and vengeful families. Professional killers were willing to murder isolated victims, but they had no interest in fighting pitched battle against federal agents who could hang them legally. In sudden quiet that followed shooting, Clara emerged from chaos to find Otto Griggs approaching with expression mixing relief with professional satisfaction. "My apologies for deception, Miss Evangeline," he said, removing hat with same courtesy he'd shown during first meeting. "I've been working undercover for Justice Department for nearly 2 years, gathering evidence of Western Line's criminal activities. Your timepiece contained final pieces we needed to bring down entire conspiracy." Clara felt mixture of relief and anger at realization she'd been manipulated, even if manipulation had ultimately served justice. "You could have told me what I was carrying, Otto. You put me through hell with your secrets." "Couldn't risk it," Otto replied, though expression showed genuine remorse. "Too many lives at stake, and too many ways for information to leak back to Pike's organization. But I swear I never intended for you to suffer as you did." Inspector Holbrook proved more decisive in victory than he'd been in contemplating potential action. Within hours, he'd telegraphed Washington with preliminary report that would result in federal marshals being dispatched to Dakota Territory within days. Western Line Railroad's expansion plans were suspended pending complete investigation, and arrest warrants were issued for corporate officials whose names appeared in evidence Clara had carried. As last of Pike's supporters were rounded up, and evidence was formally transferred to federal custody, Clara found herself standing with Silver Star at edge of battlefield, where their long flight had finally ended. Silver timepiece no longer weighed down her satchel. Its contents were now part of official record that would bring justice to Dakota Territory. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware their shared danger was over, and uncertain what that meant for bond developed during desperate flight. Silver Star looked toward horizon where his cousin's winter pasture stretched under starlight safe now from railroad spur that would have destroyed it, along with treaty rights his people had fought to preserve. "Now we find out what comes after surviving," he said quietly, taking her hand in his. "For both of us." Clara understood he was talking about more than just individual futures. In territory where relationships between Native Americans and whites were viewed with suspicion and often hostility, their partnership faced challenges having nothing to do with corrupt officials or hired gunmen. But as they walked together toward lights of Dead Crow's Hollow, where Doc Garner was treating wounded, and families were beginning to plan memorials for their dead. Clara felt certainty, surprising her with its strength. They had faced death together, fought corruption together, and discovered they worked as partners in ways transcending social barriers that would normally separate them. Silver Timepiece had brought them together and nearly gotten them killed, but it had also revealed that ordinary people could triumph over extraordinary corruption when they found courage to stand together against injustice. In harsh land where survival often meant compromise with powerful interests, that was lesson worth whatever price they'd paid to learn it. 6 months later, as spring transformed Dakota Territory's harsh landscape into something approaching beauty, Clara stood in doorway of her thriving shop in Dead Crow's Hollow, watching Silver Star return from successful negotiations with federal officials about treaty boundaries. Sacred winter pastures where protected families of murdered men had seen justice done, and territory was beginning to heal from wounds inflicted by those who viewed human lives as obstacles to profit. Western Line Railroad's expansion had been permanently halted by congressional investigation, revealing corruption reaching highest levels of corporate management. Ambrose Litchfield himself faced federal charges that would result in decades of imprisonment, and his company's assets were being liquidated to provide compensation for families harmed by illegal activities. Clara's shop had become unofficial gathering place for cross-cultural partnerships, transforming Dakota Territory's social landscape. Native American craftwork was displayed alongside European techniques, and settlers learned traditional skills, improving their chances of surviving in demanding environment. As evening approached, Clara and Silver Star walked together through meadow where spring flowers bloomed in soil that might have been torn up by railroad construction. At meadow's edge, they stopped to watch sunset paint western sky in shades of gold, reminiscent of finest silk Clara had ever worked with in Paris. Silver Star took her hand as naturally as breathing, and Clara felt deep satisfaction coming from work completed and justice achieved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as all tomorrows did on Frontier, but they would face them together, partners in every sense that mattered. The silver timepiece that had started their ordeal now sat in Clara's shop as reminder of how ordinary people could change history's course when they found courage to stand against those viewing power as license to harm others. Its most important function wasn't as evidence of past corruption, but as inspiration for future resistance to injustice. Outside frontier town of Dead Crow's Hollow, settled into peaceful rhythms of evening, secure in knowledge that justice had prevailed and future belonged to those valuing truth over profit. And in privacy of Clara's shop, as Silver Star's arms encircled her, she knew they'd found something more valuable than any treasure they'd discovered, that love could grow from survival, partnership could transcend prejudice, and ordinary courage could defeat extraordinary corruption when people chose to stand together rather than submit to oppression. In the end, it wasn't wealth or political power that had triumphed, but simple human determination to see justice done. The silver timepiece ticked quietly on its shelf, marking time and world where ordinary people had proven they possessed power to shape their own destiny, one act of courage at a time.